And now our final speaker is Pastor Paul Lawson. He is an ordained elder in the Florida United Methodist Church, serving in Dundee, Florida. That's in the Central Florida area. And a very humble man. He's also a PhD, which he received at the University of Chicago with a focus on curriculum instruction and the philosophy of education. He comes with over 25 years of experience in higher education. And he's also a native-born Jamaican with roots in Pentecostal, Wesleyan, and Liberation theology, church traditions. And I sat under his leadership for a very short time, and I learned so much under him, and I'm so thankful for his friendship, and I'm so thankful that he's going to be speaking today. So, Pastor Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David, and appreciated the invitation to come and have this conversation. Brief though it might be, we're going to try to get it done as much as possible. So what I did, I put some things together on a PowerPoint slide just so that I could move quickly through the material. Dr. Wong, I was struck by your emphasis on storytelling, because obviously one of the things I am thinking through is the extent to which we have somehow neglected somewhat the slave narratives that are so rich with thoughts and feelings about anti-racism. I mean, look, if there is going to be a context or a space for anti-racism, it would have been on the plantations. And so what I did and what I've been doing recently is to go back to those narratives to see what I could pull from what folks were saying and what they wrote about concerning their experiences. A brief background. I'm Jamaican, and Jamaica has a record of, in fact, a rather impressive record of slave revolts. Over its maybe 180 years as a slave society, it has had at least one major slave revolt every decade. And we're talking about major. Not counting the minor fights and battles here and there. And I thought to myself that this is where the work of anti-racism should be. It should be at least recognizing the experiences of those who have gone through this and learning from the slaves through the richness of their narratives, the richness of their stories. I therefore ask you then to work with me with this definition, because it's basic, it's not deeply philosophical, but I think it hits the point. When I talk about resistance, I'm talking about this inherent ability to resist harmful influences. Notice the word also organism, because organism means that this entity is experiencing what we're dealing with. And so what I'm asking us to do today is to think in terms of how slaves went through this racist system on the plantation and even beyond. And how did they accomplish what they accomplished? How did they work through that? And could they, in fact, teach us a few things? As an educator, I'd like to think that I try to learn from whatever experiences that are out there, and I would suggest to us that we take a deeper look, a more careful look at these narratives that were recorded, and we'll put up some resources here in a little bit. But the idea of resistance is obviously many faceted, right? So you can resist aggressively, you can resist defensively, you can resist in a transformative way, you can resist in a limited way, the results might not be what you want the results to be, but resistance tend to go, run the spectrum, right? And I think we understand that. And oftentimes, I know I get frustrated when it becomes a matter of talking through something instead of doing something. So my concern is our tendency to take the work of anti-racism as becoming primarily an academic endeavor. It really messes with me. It messes with my sensitivity in terms of how we do anti-racism work sometimes. And I'm frustrated. A few of you have already engaged me in these conversations where, for the life of me, I don't know why we tend to depend on books and webinars like these, frankly, to get us into the mood of figuring out what anti-racism is. Now, please, I'm not anti-intellectual. What I am, though, is anti-waste of time, right? In terms of, and I think David mentioned this briefly, wasting, appeasing, right? Appeasing the sensitivities of those who simply refuse to yield for fear of losing power. And I see a lot of that going on in our work, in our anti-racism work. We're so into making sure that people feel comfortable. So let's step back and let's go back to these slave narratives, because this was not what they were about. They were not about making people feel comfortable. After all, the situation was dire, and for many of them, it was a question of life and death. And so here's where we need to be. Learn by doing, learn by experiencing. We should reflect the lived experiences of those who were or are now victims of racism. At least be prepared to actively listen to their story. I say actively, which means that we get involved, right? We get involved in what they're talking about and be more than sympathetic. We're empathetic. We start walking a mile or two in their shoes. I think we talk too much. I think we're too academic a lot of times. And so I think we need to enter into the experiences of the slaves, and no better way to do that than to participate in what they're doing and in what they went through. So I'm kind of Xing out the ethic perspective, the outsider perspective, the most comfortable perspective. Like sitting on this webinar talking about this is the most comfortable place to be, right? No engagement, no skin in the game. We just sit, we talk academically about stuff, which is fine. Don't get me wrong, it's fine. But I think what the slave narratives teach us is that these folks were engaged in their own welfare, in their own well-being. And I think we need to move from the outsider perspective to the insider perspective, where we participate in what they're going through. So here are some themes I hope, I'd like to read two of these narratives briefly. I had 3 or 4, but time is against us. But here's some themes we need to anticipate. As you read, go read them. And as I read a couple of these, the ethical theme. In other words, you resist out of duty. You don't resist calculating what the outcome is going to be. You resist out of duty. And that was their sense of ethics, right? It's like what they call a deontological approach to ethics. You do it because it's the right thing to do. You do it because it's the categorical imperative, right? This is what I got to do. I have to resist. Secondly, there's the communal sense. The themes running through these narratives is solidarity. And I think Dr. Wong mentioned that in terms of community, in terms of, and I was taking notes here, that with and for the others, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You got to be a part of that. You got to be in solidarity with them, and they are already in solidarity with each other. How dare us then try to sit on the sideline and say we're into anti-racism work, and then, again, there's no sacrifice, there's no skin in the game. We just talk. Let me read a couple of these narratives and then close this. Um, Pardon the fine print, but I wanted to make sure that I have you read with me or read along with me. So this is Fanny Berry, enslaved in Virginia. I'm going to do my best slave talk here, right? I was one slave that the poor white man had his match. See, Miss Sue, these here old white men said, what I can't do by fair means, I'll do by foul. One tried to throw me, but he couldn't. We tussled and knocked over chairs. And when I got a grip, I scratched his face all to pieces. And there was no more bothering Fanny from him. But oh, honey, some slaves would beat up so when they resisted. And sometimes if you belled, the overseer would kill you. Us colored women had to go through a plenty, I tell you. Notice the violence. Notice the resistance. I put there in blue highlights self-defense, but that's just to appease some of you who might think that this violence is uncalled for. You're being put upon, you're being abused, you're enslaved, and you're being victimized. What is your course of action? And so the challenge for us is to ask ourselves, would we, even as Christians, get to that place where we believe force might be necessary? Yeah, I said it. Force might be necessary. All right. So we're learning, we're trying to learn. And if there's a Christian answer to this, maybe at some other point we can have that conversation. The second narrative from Lou Smith, Enslaved in Mississippi. Now, this one is tragic, but let's read. My mother told me that he, the master, owned a woman who was the mother of several children. And when her babies would get about a year or two of age, he'd sell them, and it would break her heart. She never got to keep them. When her fourth baby was born and was about 2 months old, she just studied all the time about how she would have to give it up. And one day she said, I just decided I'm not going to let old master sell this baby. He just ain't going to do it. And she got up and gave it something out of a bottle, and pretty soon it was dead. Slave narratives tend to be very pointed, right? They cut through some of our modern kind of, idiosyncrasies, and they get to the heart of the problem. A kind of euthanasia here, a kind of mercy killing, which is a part of that resistance, right? Now, we can talk about this some other time as to the ethics of it or whatever, but put yourselves in their shoes, live in their lives, in their skins, and ask yourself if you would have the heart to make that kind of decision to have your baby killed or apparently poisoned instead of going through slavery. A type of resistance, again, that we need to respect, I believe, and we need to recognize as beyond, obviously, what we would do. So that's where I'm going to end this. Again, slave narratives give us a nice view of kind of some of the other ways we can go about taking care of anti-racism and the work that we do. But we have to, at the most basic level, we have to resist. We have to resist. Talking is not enough. And maybe for some people, talking is resistance. I don't know. But let's continue working. And I appreciate the work of all of you who are in this and doing the best darn job you can. Thank you, Brother Erwin.
Thank you so much, Pastor Paul, for your insight. And I do want to just remind everybody that the goal of these webinars is exactly what Pastor Paul and everybody's been talking about today. While the goal is to bring awareness, the goal is that it would spark action. It would spark action in your church, in your life, in your conversations, and in everything that you do. And so thank you so much for that reminder.